Good evening. We'll start this year now, and we'll start off with saying Capital Chof for those who need a refuah shlema. Particularly, I mentioned last week, Chana, Yenta, Rivka, Bas Shendel, Baruch Hashem, has improved, and we hope to see a refuah shlema. And then Lam Natseach Mizbel David, Ya'an Cha Adonai B'Yom Tzara, Yisagev Cha Hashem Elahei Yaakov, Yishlach Ezracha Mikodesh, Shemitzir in Yisadecha, Yizker Kol Min Chaysecha, V'Lascha Yidach Shnesela, Yiten L'cha Chilo V'Vecha, V'Chol Atzoscha Yimale, Neranena B'Shuasecha, V'Shem Eloheinu Nidgel Yimale, Adonai Kol Mishalesecha. Atu Yodati, Ki Heshia Adonai Meshichoi, Ya'anehu Mishmei Kodshoi, B'Gvoris Yeshi Yeminoi, Ele V'Rechev, V'Ele V'Asusim, V'Anachnu B'Shem Adonai Eloheinu Nazkir, Hey Makara Uven Afalo, Vanachnu Kamnu Vanis Eidod, Adonai Hishia Hamelach Yaninu Vim Kainu. Just putting stucker for her. In her spruce. There we go. All right. So let's start off with our Shia and start off with some business left from last week. Last week we had discussion about croutons and whether croutons are hamotzi, Mazonis. I know a little bit more this week than you last week about croutons. I was in touch with the Sova Foods, and they put me in touch with one of their mashgichim who was very kindly shared with me information. Sometimes it says on the croutons, it will say, I'll say, he worked for me in Hebrew. Sometimes he says just salat or salads. Sometimes it says salat and marak, or here it says soup and salads. Now that's going to have a difference for Shabbos, that when it says salad, then it's not suitable for putting in soup on Shabbos in a kli sheni, because we have an issue of bishul achar afir. When it says soup and salad, that means it's been fried, deep fried, and therefore it can be put, that may be placed into a klisheni of soup. And what was more, I was not so concerned last week about the bracha, about the issue of Shabbos as much as the bracha. Why, if you take a piece of bread, cut it into cubes, why does it become mazonos? And it was pointed out to me after the shir last week that on the packets of the croutons it says birchos mazonos. So I was curious to find out on what basis that is. Okay, so let's move on. So number one, I know it's a lot of text here. Here, this is from the Alter Rebbe's Seder Birchos Hanehenin. So let's look at the red writing. It talks here about bread lechem ofui shedis bashal b'kedera. If you take bread and you put it into a pot of food, it's cooking, it still remains hamotzi. And then skip 2 lines. Ela imke nimche halechem bebishul, unless the bread disintegrates in the process of cooking. So if you take a whole, that's why we make a hamotzi on what we call French toast, because it's still, although it's been fried, but it still retains its texture. But then skip down to the 5th line. If it's been broken down to less than a kazayis per piece, then it's lost its status as lechem. Even if it still has got the texture of bread, it doesn't. It's not. That's not called appearance of bread. So if bread, regular hamotzi bread, has been put into a pot and been cooked, so even if it retains its texture, but because it's been cooked and it's less than a kazayis, so then those pieces become mazonos. Then goes further, that's when it was disintegrated because of cooking. The next, v'yesh oyomrim, that if before the cooking you pirei hapasle prusis ktanas, you chopped up the bread into small pieces, even if niro sheyesh alan toya lechem, so then that also makes it into mazonos. So basically what's happening here is, if bread is cut into small pieces, less than a kazayas, and cooked, then it comes down to mezainis. And that's so the deep fried croutons are definitely mezainis. That seems to be pretty clear. What bothered me is that looking online, etc., that a lot of these croutons they're not made into, they're actually baked again. They are put into an oven. It's just chopped up bread. So again, you've got here some croutons we said are for soup, which means that they've been deep fried. If it's just for salad, then that means it hasn't been deep fried, and still it may stay on the package as mezainis. So we're still a little bit, we're not out of hot water yet, hot oil. Look, so on the left we have here from the book, I think it's called Brochus or Brochus on Food by Bodner. So he writes here, packaged croutons sold in grocery stores are made from bread, baked especially for the production of croutons. Therefore, the brochas mezainis. Then he goes into when it's put into salads, making two brochas, and Rosh Shlomo Zalman, etc. So let's come down for the moment. So the question which I'm asking, it's regular bread, and it says that because the bread is baked especially for the production of croutons, therefore it's mezainis. And what's the explanation for that? So I believe that the explanation is what I'm going to say now. So in other words, I'm speculating what these rabbonim in the various hechsherim, why they decided that croutons are mezainis. So now we've got here, this is a quote from Shulchan Aruch, by Mechaber, Kuf Samerches. And those who learn Alter Rebbe's say the Berchanen, and it's in Perek Beis. We've got one of the three categories of mezainis is something called Pas Habo'o Bekisnin. The word Pas Habo'o, the term Pas Habo'o Bekisnin, has got three explanations. The first one is Pas She'osu Kemin Kisim. It's bread made like a pouch, Shemamalin Oishe Dvash Osuker, which is filled with sweet stuff, honey, goyim, nuts. In other words, something like a strudel. So it's a regular pastry. So let's say kokosh, babka, where it's a regular, it can be a challah dough, but then you put in lots of chocolate in it, and chocolate and sugar, and that makes it into mezainis. That's one form. Now, if anyone knows a bit of Arabic or Ladino, I don't know which language that is. I don't know. That's the first pirush. That Pas Habo'o Bekisnin is a pouch filled with tasty stuff. So the word kisnin, loshen kiss, is a pouch. The second translation is v'yesh meforshim, that it's a dough which is made with a mixture instead of just water. It's made with honey or oil or milk or other. So it's a flavored bread. So he says if it's a strongly flavored bread, he says that the nikar, the time of the tavlin nikar be'isa, the taste of the flavoring is felt in the dough. That makes it into mezainis. So that's what we rely upon for our cakes and biscuits and possibly a lot of crackers that they're made with shortening, which it makes it into mezainis according to the second opinion. Then we have a third opinion. V'yesh meforshim, I'm skipping the Rashi writing. V'yesh meforshim, shehi pas bein metubelas bein she'ein metubelas. Doesn't matter whether it's flavored or not. She'oisin oiso, here it says ka'ovin, but ka'achin yeveshin. It's like a thin cracker. The choisis oison, and they are nibbled. V'hei nikroin biskonis. Now I looked up whether the word biscuit, I didn't manage to trace it, whether biscuits comes from this biskonis, but it looks like it's a thin cracker which people would typically have at the end of the meal as an extra, just a nibble. Now that's the third opinion. It's the opinion of Rav Hai Gaon quoted in the Aruch. The Alter Rebbe in Seder Birchas Hanenin doesn't bring this. This is the basis why Sfardim have the minhag on our regular matzahs. They say a whole year round. They say boirim min mazonos because of the shita of Rav Hai Gaon, which we just read. That this is called kach in yavation. These thin crackers. It's not a normal bread, and they make mazonos on it a whole year, and on Pesach they make hamotzi. The Alter Rebbe, my hunch is that the Alter Rebbe didn't bring this opinion because this is if it's hamotzi on Pesach, it's hamotzi a whole year. Be that as it may, but this is the basis why something like pretzels made with flour and water. Why is pretzels mezainis? Because no one makes it for a meal. It's a kind of thing. It's just a nibble. And similarly, perhaps breadsticks, perhaps chow mein. These are things which people don't have as a meal. They have them as a nibble, and it's baked the chatchila that way. Now, coming back to the croutons. No, so you have here, actually, the croutons, I saw some clips. It looks like regular loaves of bread. They say that they don't taste like regular bread. Perhaps they're not flavored the way like regular bread. I don't know exactly the difference. They say it would not taste like regular bread. But it's this picture, it looks like a regular loaf of bread, goes through a slicer, a dicer, whatever it may be. So what they're saying is, I made this bread as an unfinished product. I made it in order to create these nibbles called croutons. So just like you've accepted that something like chow mein, it's just a nibble, and therefore it's mezainis. So the croutons, which it's part of a process to become just a nibble food, and therefore it's mezainis. That I believe is their svara. Now, I see on the chat someone's asking, what about Rakuzen's crackers? Would they also be? They write on them on the packet. It's written that they're mezainis. Personally, I'm uncomfortable with it, because if it's a 5-inch square, it's hamotzi, and if it's a 2.5-inch square, it becomes mezainis. I don't know on what basis you can say that. That I find difficult, but there is room for it. As you see, something which is clearly made just for a nibble, and especially the way I've explained it now, it makes a bit more sense to me why they're saying that those small matzahs are mezainis, because that's what they're made for. Right. So someone is pointing out here, what happens if you have leftover challah and you cube it and spice it with oil and bake? Well, that will remain hamotzi unless it is deep fried. So homemade. So that's a very important point. Thank you. So commercial croutons there's room to say that they're mezainis. Yes, I'll explain that. But if you take your leftover bread and cube it, if you deep fry it, it becomes mezainis. But if you just put it into the oven without deep frying, then it remains hamotzi. Bread pudding is thank you for that text. Bread pudding becomes mezainis because when you bake bread pudding, the bread becomes mushy. One of the definitions is that the water in which it's soaked, this water turns whitish, changes the color of the water. So the bread pudding is mezainis. And yeah, right. Okay. Let's come back to this quote from it has here, for homemade croutons. There you have it there. It would become hamotzi. And now he's also now going into, he's saying that if you're having it in a salad, he's not very happy that you should say just one broch on the whole salad. He's saying that you should make a mezainis on the croutons and the appropriate brocha for the salad or the soup. Okay, that's similar to what we discussed last week. Let's move on. Right, now, briefly touched on last week, but I want to give it a little bit more time. What is the situation where you have a salad made of cucumbers, tomatoes, and avocado? Just let's keep it simple. And so there's a third of each. So all right. So what do you have to make a separate bracha on the avocado, or do you say the majority is hardoma, therefore the bracha is hardoma? What I'll tell you is the following. Similar question could be with a fruit salad, where it's common we have a lot of fruit which are high eights and a lot of fruit which are hardama. let's say you've got 5 different fruit in the salad, 3 of them are ha'etz and 2 of them are adama, or vice versa. So the Achronim, Reb Shlomo Zalman, the Rabbi Yashiv, Reb Tzin Abba Shaul, I see them all quoted as saying you make the bracha of the majority. But my logic is not comfortable with this. I'm not in when I've got a mixture, and you say, well, normally we say the one which is more important prevails. But if they're all equally, kulam mahuvim, kulam berurim, kulam giberim, I love all of them. I love all of the foods. So then we say we're going to the majority, and the majority becomes the overarching, the balabos. It becomes the dominating feature. So what we're trying to establish, a halacha, whether it's a ha'etz or adamo, we want to establish what is the ikir pleasure here. I'm having a food. What is the main food here? Is it banana? Is it pineapple? Is it apple? Is it nuts? I want to establish the food. So what you're telling me that the majority of the salad is ha'etz. So what? I want to know what is this food. And therefore, my feeling about it is that a fruit cocktail, or in this case with a salad with the avocado, that when you've got there's no majority. You got 3 minorities or 5 minorities. But okay, be that as it may. What happens if you have just 2 minim, ha'etz and ha'adam? So here we have 2 quotes. One is from the Chayei Adam, and he says, when we talk about a mixture, says the Chayei Adam, when we say that the majority of the mixture is going to decide, again, they're both equally kulam ahuvim, but they're both equally appreciated. So then we have to follow the majority. So he says that's only if the minority is not noticeable. So therefore, in a case where you've got larger cubes or whatever pieces of tomato, cucumber, and avocado, so the Chayei Adam would say that you have to make 2 brachas. The Mishnah Brura, by contrast, so he writes, "Va'afilu kol min v'min oimid b'fnei atzmim v'niker nami boso roiv asdinam." The Mishnah Brura disagrees, and he says, even in the salad where each item is recognizable on its own, you still would say the majority prevails. The Mishnah Brura is much later than the Chayei Adam, obviously, but he's quoting for the Pri Megadim. So here we've got 2 shittas in poskim. What is the status of my of a mixture of larger pieces where you can recognize each piece individually? Is the bracha ha'etz or had? Is it one food, and therefore the majority prevails, or is it 2 separate foods because the pieces are separate, are distinct? So this is in all poskim we have this debate. Then what is the Alter Rebbe's opinion? So really, it's not clear what the Alter Rebbe's opinion is, and I've spent a lot of time this week seeing different meforshim. The Mizgas HaShulchan learns one way, and there's a sefer called Likutei Marit learns another way, and it's and more recent commentaries also. I'm just quoting here from Rabbi Ber Levin, who's Zalzayin Gesund, is a brilliant man, and he's got a sefer called Shiurei Halacha L'Maisa, and he writes, Shnei minei ma'achol she'eirvon k'dei le'ochlon yachad. If you've got 2 foods, and each one's got a separate bracha, and you've mixed them to eat them together, v'chol min nika b'fnei atzmai, but in the mixture, they are recognizable separately, v'lo nizbashlu yachad, and they haven't been cooked together, which then would for sure would make them into one man. Nechleku b'zeh poskim. So he acknowledges that there's a machlokas poskim. V'das Rabbeinu nira shetzorach levorach al kol echad b'nifrad. According to the Alter Rebbe, he's got some brilliant pilpul by how he comes to this conclusion. But the bottom line is, he says that one should make a separate bracha on each one. So coming back to bottom line with the salad, tomato, cucumber, and avocado, and each one is recognizable in the mixture. So according to the way Rabbi Levin is weighing it up, and that one would make a separate bracha on the avocado, and then make a separate bracha on the tomatoes or cucumbers, and enjoy the rest of your meal. Okay, let's move on. We touched briefly last week not so briefly, about an issue relating to ribis, and I just want to clarify a very important point. And where I put the question is, this is my own question, but it's just to bring out a point. Working in the accounts office of a non-from Jew, and I'm confronted with to process charges to a Jew, which would involve him having to pay ribis. Am I, as the worker for a non-from Jew, am I allowed to process that account? So I was speaking to the boys on Sunday in school, in the Shiva Ktanim in Chida. Asked them, what if you were a travel agent and Jack Levy comes into your into your shop and he asks, I want to book a trip to Dubai on Saturday morning. Are you allowed to sell a Jack Levy a ticket to travel on Shabbos? That's a question of Messiah, of Lifnei Iver. Actually, here with ribis, facilitating ribis is even more serious, and we'll see in a moment. Okay, so this is from the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch on Hilchos Ribis, and you see it's Sif Gimel. He says you're not allowed to lis asig ben loivo malva beribis. You're not allowed to be an agent, a go-between. One who is an agent, a go-between, or if you assisted either borrower or lender, or you give them an address where to go. Then by facilitating, so then it's an Isser of Lifnei Iver, which is this week's parish, I believe. If the person could have managed to do the loan without you, still there's also there's assisting, there's facilitating, which they couldn't have managed without you. That's Lifnei Iver min HaTorah. If you're facilitating when they could have managed without you, is Issa the Rabbana. But the more important point is the next paragraph. One who acts as a witness. There's a loan and it needs a witness. So you are you're facilitating the deal. Or if you are a guarantor for the borrower. Or if you are the secretary to write up this document, which is going to be charging ribis to another yid. All of these are worse than the one who just introduced and walked away. Here they are actually facilitating a loan, which is going to be charging ribis. As it says in Pasuk, you should not be imposing neshech, a ribis charge. Even if the loan would have happened without you. But you should not be facilitating the charge. You shouldn't be placing the charge. And therefore, coming back to the imaginary situation, which I'm sure it's not so far-fetched, of a frum Jew working for a non-frum Jew who is charging ribis to a Jewish client, I think you're not allowed to process that account, that charge. If there is a heter, make sure it's a very solid heter, because we're talking here about a Issa min HaTorah. Let's move on. Okay, Friday I got this picture on my WhatsApp. As you can see, it's wholemeal flour, which doesn't sift terribly well. And then you see towards the top there, I know what it's called in English, but it's I guess when it's alive, it crawls. And so it's not kosher. And it was obviously in the flour before the baking started. Oh, let's go back. Not too far. Okay, so now after baking, I see that there is infestation in the flour. Does that make the challahs which are baked treif, so to be, also? So I've got here a quote from a sefer called HaKashrus, and he says the following. That's Sif Yud Aleph. Botzek shehu chanefer, you've prepared a dough, or or bread which was from a flour which was not sifted. If there's leftover, you You check the leftover. If you bake without sifting and then you check the flour afterwards and it's all clear, you're okay. But if you found even a single worm in the leftover flour, so then yesh oisrim oisabachila. So then that would reflect on the whole dough. Now that's not mamish the case over here. They had actually looked through, not sifted, but they had looked through the flour. So makes it a little bit easier. But just the halacha is that if you do find infestation after having baked and you didn't sift the flour before, then you'd have a problem with the all that which you baked already from the same batch. Let's go on. Right. So this is very interesting, Shaila. Last week on Friday, I was sitting in the Beis Hairoah. I'll come to the text in a moment. I was sitting in the Beis Hairoah, and a woman calls up and asks, "Does a meat thermometer need to be toiveled?" The question is a little bit more interesting because the meat thermometer has got a dial on the top, and it probably says about 50,000 times over the packaging, "Do not immerse." At any rate, if you put that into the mikveh, if water penetrates into the mechanism, it may affect its functioning. So there's a reluctance to tovel it. But meanwhile, does a meat thermometer have to be toveled? So here's the answer. We have here, this is in Siman Kuf Chof in Yeredeya, talking about the Tvilas Kalim, a knife of a shoichet. So for Yesh Mishoyim, there are those who say, or a knife which is used for skinning animals. Some say it does not need tevila. There are more says Yesh Cholkim. And some say it does need to be toveled. But tovel belay bracha. Then it's recommended you tovel it without a bracha. Then he says, the metal rollers which are used for perforating the matzahs. You make the dough shouldn't rise. So einam tzrichin tevila. Well, what's the common denominator? A knife of shchita and the rollers piercing the matzahs. The thing is that both of them are used in processing food well before it's up to being ready to eat. It's not like a baking tin. You put in raw food and it comes out edible, and pots and pans, etc. Here, a knife of shchita, it's used earlier, but it's not ready. It's not used for ready to eat food. The same thing with the matzahs. The rollers are used only before. That seems to be a common thing. So then the question is, if the Ramah is saying, well, nevertheless, you should tovel the shochet's knife, why doesn't he say you should also tovel the metal things which are used for making the matzahs? And the answer is that a shochet's knife, although it's made for an early stage, but it could be used for cutting food. And therefore, you should tovel it. By contrast, the rollers for the matzahs, there's nothing else you can do with them. That's a tool only made for an early stage of the matzah baking process, and therefore einam tzrichin tefillah. On this basis, a meat thermometer is used for checking whether it's done, how well the meat is done, but it's not used for actually preparing the food at all. And as a result, when I looked around, and that's the obviously you won't see this in Sforim of from 30 years ago, but the contemporary Rabbonim take the view that you don't need to tovel it on this basis because it's not made to prepare the food, and it's engaging in an earlier stage. Okay, I see here a question. If I'm not mistaken, ribis is only for personal accounts, not corporate, which is why Jewish bankers could charge interest. Don't need to mention out loud. No, sorry. If you go to a Bank Leumi or something like that, you will actually see a heter iska displayed in the hallway, and that's the way it would work. Not because what does it mean, a corporate account? A corporate means a group of people. I mean, imagine Minchas Yitzchak has a tshuva about this. Imagine if you have Mr. Baker and Mrs. Baker open up a limited company, and it's a bakery, and it's open on Pesach because it's not them; it's the limited company. So say hebsach nishtan. You don't. It's a shutfus. It belongs to them. That the halacha doesn't really recognize a company which doesn't have people. Ownership means people. So no, a Jewish bank would, to be able to charge ribis to fellow Jews, would have to have a heter isker, and there are hetere isker which are compiled specially for banks, and that all their dealings, lending and borrowing, is under heter isker. Okay, now let's go on to some really savory geschmack shaila. So this is a story about locust. Now, we did learn recently that there are locusts which we are allowed to eat. So what happened in one community here in the UK, a young lad had been to Eretz Yisrael, and he picked up a tub of locusts with a hechsher, and he brought it back to town. And on Shabbos morning at the Kiddush, he's offering everyone, have a taste of a locust. So what's the story? Is it okay or not? So let's go through the Shulchan Aruch and Siman Pei Simone Chagovim Kol Sheyesh Bei Arba Raglayim Ve'Arba Knofayim, 4 legs and 4 wings, and it's got the wings cover the majority of the body. It's got a few descriptions, and then it says if it has all the simonim, it should be also has to be known as chagov. There has to be a tradition that this is called a chagov. Fine. So that's the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch says it's okay as long as we know it's a chagov. So here we have the Taz. The Taz says that nowadays we do not eat locusts, even though we know that it's called a chagov, because we don't rely on our knowledge. We assume that it's not really a chagov. Now, so then we've got then the Taimoni community who can tell you with the fact they say, well, for sure we eat chagov, and I've heard that some of these locusts have like a kind of a dimple on the back, which looks like a ches, and they say, oh, that's the simon that it's a chagov. So the Taimoni community do eat chagovim. They have a tradition. Then in Morocco, also in many communities, they would eat locusts. They would eat chagovim. So now it becomes a question: is the Ashkenazi community not eating because of unfamiliarity? So then, can we then say, well, okay, but now we've met our Taimoni brethren, and therefore their bikiyas should be permitting us to eat the chagovim. So this is now we have a second quote from the Shulchan Aruch, and that is in Siman Pei Beis. So let's read that carefully. That's really talking about birds. So there's one region which do not have a tradition. There's another region which do have a tradition. Can the ones which don't have a tradition enjoy the food based upon the masoides of another region? Yesh misha oiser, yesh misha matir, yesh lochash ledivrei oiser. So the Shulchan Aruch is saying very clearly, there's room to, there's a valid argument to say, well, they've got a masoida, you can piggyback on them. But he passed to the Mechaber says, no, you can't rely on the divrei, you can't rely on someone else's masoida. So as Ashkenazim, we have in our masoida, it's our masoida is saying that we're not confident about chagovim. You're confident that in your community that's okay. In our community, it's not okay. Someone sent me a couple of articles. One article by someone called the Rabbi Dr. Slifkin, who is all for promoting that it should be okay. And then I saw other articles which are not so poshut. And one of the things I see is that the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, Reb Chaim Ibn Attar, so he lived in Morocco, and he's got a sefer on Yeridea called Pri Toyar, and he's very, very strong that not chas v'sholem, you shouldn't be eating the locust. It's not reliable. So even amongst the Moroccan community itself, we see Gedolei Yisrael, the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, was the contemporary of the Baal Shem Tov, So he's very much against it, and certainly it's something which we should discourage. And those communities which do, fine, that's their Messiah, and that's fine. Let's move on. Right. Oh, this is like a very interesting question. That someone asked me that there is this national census, and the national census also includes a question um, about religion. And we know in Torah that when it comes to counting Yidden, it was done through a Machzas HaShekel. In later generations, in Nach, we see about using sheep. There is a reluctancy to count. And it says a whole thing with David HaMelech did make a count, and it was like if we use the word obsession, and Yoav tried to stop it, and then there was a Magefa. It was so we have a string. We don't count Yidden, and that's why by a minion we want to count. We count Hashia Samecha. Yeah, that's how we count to avoid counting. So here's a question: is counting in a census going to be an issue? So I'm going to come back to the halacha side. I want to look at the two stories, which give me the prayer, how do you say, the oomph to say that after you absolutely have to answer yes, you have to write you're Jewish. When the Rebbe, here there's a story, it's printed in Yemei Melech, when the Nazis Yamach Shemam entered Paris. So they made a list of all the citizens to know their ethnic and origins and their religion. And it was obviously what that purpose was. This is in 1940 or 41. And it was by then the extermination of the Poland Jewry was happening with full intensity. When the officers came to the house of the Rebbe wasn't home. And because of the danger, they were told that they were given an ambiguous answer that he's Orthodox. Orthodox is ambiguous, yeah? So then when the Rebbe came home and found out about this, he rushed without any delay. He rushed to the office where the records are being taken, and to everyone's shock, he told them, write down that I'm Jewish. So he didn't want to be listed, even if they doubt whether he's Jewish. Now, perhaps this is the inspiration which the Rebbe had, a story with his father, with the Rebbe Leivik. So this is Yekaterinoslav, and this is the year when he was arrested, which is, I think, 1939, 38, 39. It was before Pesach that year, and there was a census. And one of the questions which were asked was about faith. Now, this is in communist Russia, Stalinist Russia. And the question was, are you a believer or not a believer? Rebbe Leivik, who was the Rav of town, he saw that people were hesitant. So Rebbe Leivik went a whole sturm, a whole campaign. And in public, he said in shul in a thunderous way that it's forbidden for a Yid to avoid this question. Whoever who denies answering this question, he is denying b'malchus Shemaim. And it says later, he went from shul to shul. This is the year before he was arrested. So when a Yid is asked, what is, when you see a census and they're asked what's your religion, of course you have to answer your religion. You have to say that you're a Yid. There's no question about that. And then you have the question, does it go into the question of accounting Yidden? Okay, so now the poskim which I did see addressing this are poskim addressing the community in Eretz Yisrael. And so here we have, what about a national census in Eretz Yisrael? Before reading that, I want to show you an interesting observation. Even when the Yidden were counted with the Machzas HaShekel, there was never a full, thorough, and reliable number, because Shevet Levi were not counted with them. So we have a number of 600,300, whatever it is, 603,000, but Levi is not included. The rest of the Yidden were counted from 20 to 60. The Bnei Levi were counted from the age of 30 days. So you'd never really, between the Levium and the rest of the Klal Yisrael, you'd never have a clear number of any segment of the population, how many members there are. It's always going to be a little bit of a guesswork. So coming back about this is from the Sefer Piskei Teshuvos, about counting Yidden, that would also be if it's only, even if it's just written. And then talks about if you're using just like putting Machzas Shekel or other things, that would be mutal advar mitzvah. And then, therefore, that raises the question of participating in the national census in Eretz Yisrael, which is counting the Yidden. And he says there are many goyim also, but then some say, but because the goyim, they're also, therefore, the number is going to be not a reliable number. So in Eretz Yisrael, we've got here different opinions, and of course the more Natura Carta type of poskim. You got Moshe Sternbuch from the Ada. He says not to participate in the census altogether. On the other side, you've got the Tzitz Eliezer, who does allow participating in the census, and then you've got, I think it was Rav Wosner, Shevet Halevi, where he kind of finds some kind of method that it shouldn't be for the purpose of counting, but for some kind of benefits or something. He gives some kind of a way around it. But at any rate, it's, I think in Chutz La'aretz, they're not counting Yidden, they're counting all the people in the country. And if you're asked the question, are you Jewish? I think there's no question that you have to answer that you are. Right, let's move on. Okay, I know we've touched on this before, but it's come up again. Someone who's a Baruch Hashem, he was very, very ill last year. They added a name to him. He added a name to him, and so now he's asking, does he have to redo the ksuba? So this is from the Sefer Mishpat Ksuba, and if you'd changed the name totally, I know the ksuba was right when it was written, but if it's cannot be processed now, so then if you've changed your name totally, you know. Before you know Nazusha, and now you call Moshe Leib, so you're a different person. You can't be traced. So then you'd have to make a new ksuba. If it's just an added name, so your traceability is still there, and therefore some say you don't have to do anything, and some say you should make a note on the margin and bring two witnesses and they make a note on the bottom of the thing that this name was added, and then they'd witness it and sign it, and then you can go on. So that would be probably, if you wanted to be extra careful, you'd do that. Get two witnesses to add a note at the bottom of the ksuba, and that's it. Let's move on. Question which I was asked this week. It's actually very, very interesting. Someone asked me this 2 days ago, and then I looked at it more carefully today. And then this afternoon, the same question came up. A Yid was born in Russia. It's almost the same question. A Yid was born in Russia, and he was born as a lefty, but he was forced to change to become a righty, to write with his right hand. So now he writes with his right hand, and everything else he does with his left hand. So the question is, which side is it? Which arm does he put tefillin on? Is he a righty or is he a lefty? So now, in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, it talks about the other way around. Yeah, let's read the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, because let's go back a little bit. We've got two opinions: whether the criterion is your ability to write, or the criterion is where you have strength. Because we've got one pasuk, the hand with which you write, normally, that's the hand which should be tying the tefillin. Therefore, since you normally write with your right hand, so then the tefillin are tied on the left hand. And then it's got to do with the hand which writes. Then we have in Parshas Hoya Kiviyach, I think it says Yod Cho is spelled Yud Dalad Chof Hey, Yad Kehe. The tefillin should be placed on the weaker hand. So usually it goes together. The hand which doesn't write is the weaker hand. But what would happen if you got the stronger hand doesn't write? You write with one hand, and your stronger hand is the other one. The Alter Rebbe had a great grandson, called Reb Baruch Shalom. That's the Rebbe's Elta Zeda. And Reb Baruch Shalom was born without fingers on his right hand. And of the Alter Rebbe, just before he passed away, he said to the Tzemach Tzedek, his grandson, "Is there anything you want to ask?" And afterwards, the Tzemach Tzedek realized he should have asked about what should he do about his oldest son when it will come to tefillin. He was 8 years old at the time. What would happen? What should he do for tefillin? So, and here we have the Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch says the criterion is writing. The Tzemach Tzedek has got long tshuvas, 2 or 3 tshuvas, where he says the criterion is strength. He disagrees with the Alter Rebbe, although he doesn't mention the Alter Rebbe by name. So here we've got 2 opinions. So there, in the Shulchan Aruch, we have both opinions in the earlier poskim, and the Alter Rebbe says the main thing is going to writing. Then now here the Alter Rebbe continues. When do we say the Ikki is writing? If he was born a lefty, if he was born a righty, and then he trained himself to write with his left hand, but everything else he does with his right hand, don't call him a lefty. So again, we've got 2 functions, writing and everything else. He has changed over, but only changed over for writing, not semi-changed over, semi-change. Then he says, then we'll say no. Since he still has his strength in his left hand, so he's still called a lefty. No, so again, since he still has his strength in his right hand, his writing with his left hand, his strength is his right, so a change is still retaining his original status. But if he effected a change that he, instead of being a righty for writing and for strength, everything now is on the left side, then he is a lefty and he will put the tefillin on his right arm. So this is just the opposite of the situation which I was facing. Here we're talking about a right-handed person who trained himself to write with his left. Our situation is the opposite. He's a left-handed person who trained himself to write with his right hand. Is he now a righty or a lefty? This is our question. Yeah? So it's not explicit in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. So now I've looked at 2 Sforim. One is Shevach Yakor or Shevach Yikor, and the other one is Dinei Iter. So let's read the Shevach Yikor, which they're basing on the Tzemach Tzedek. So he says like this: a lefty who trained himself to write with his right hand, but he can still write with his left hand. Most of his activities he will do with his left hand. So you see what's going on here. He can write with his left and he can write with his right. Everything else, so there's more weight to the left hand, yeah, than to the right. And therefore he says he's a lefty. Even though he can write now also with his right hand, but he's a lefty. And he should put tefillin on his right arm. But then he should also put on, after davening, he should put on another shalyat on the other arm. The other source is a little bit less clear, but this is what I believe remains. That in that's talking about where he can write with both hands. So then he remains a lefty. In our case, and this is why I asked the person today, in our case, this fellow who was brought up in Soviet Russia and forced to write with his right hand, can he write with his left hand? If he can, we in shtuch, because he has a business of 2 tefillin, 2 shalyats. But if he cannot write with his left hand, only with his right hand, so then, according to the Alter Rebbe, he is a right-handed person and he puts the tefillin on his left arm. Right. I have one more thing on my list, although it's not on your list. It came up later. Perhaps I brought it up earlier about the national lottery symbol, and I got something in one of these advertisers. The national lottery is funding their activity, which is very nice of them. And the national lottery symbol is crossed fingers. So I wrote to them. I wrote to the organizer, say that I'm questioning whether a Jewish organization should be advertising a symbol of crossed fingers, which is clearly a Christian practice, as if to invoke a better mazel, and especially when they're thinking about a lottery. Who's going to win the lottery? The one who's crossed his fingers is going to have a better, a better mazel to win the lottery. That's the thinking there. So he wrote back to me. He sends he says what about the Union Jack? And what about Rabbi Sudak Shalom, who received the OBE? And so, and then he gives a reference to a tshuva of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. I looked it up in Yeridea, I forgot which number, and there he talks about he talks about postage stamps, a postage stamp which got a tselem on it or a galach on it, and he says it's okay. And so I wrote back to him with all due respect. I understand those are national things, national symbols, etc. Here it's a bit. I think it's a bit stronger. Here it's a practice which Christians are doing as an act of faith. And I said, I know you say, I'm not telling you Kabludat, I'm not telling you, I'm just telling you it's something which one should ask a Shaila, and whatever they will, whatever your own will pass can be that as it may, but I just felt that it's something which should be brought up and addressed. Okay, that's the rest of my list. And so we're finishing a little bit late and a little bit early. I said 10 to 9, but it's now 5 to 9. Okay, so seid alle gesund and a guten Shabbos, and we should meet in good health. Tomet Kalayamin.
Good Shabbos, Shkoyach.
Good Shabbos.
Shkoyach, good Shabbos.
Shabbos Shkoyach.
Oh.